All right, let's get right into one of the weirdest decisions in all of medieval history. It was made by a man who had, everything to lose, King John II of France. It's a story about honor, chaos, and a choice so bizarre it's still debated centuries later. So that's a quote from the man himself, King John. Sounds pretty noble, right? It's all about integrity, duty, the idea that a king's word is law. But what makes this quote so fascinating is when and why he said it.
And there's the million-dollar question. See, he was captured in a war, then released. But when his son, who was supposed to take his place as a hostage, escaped, John didn't celebrate. Nope. He actually packed his bags and willingly went back to prison in England. Why on earth would he do that? Well, to figure it out, we've got to go back to the battlefield. Okay, let's get into the first piece of this puzzle, the absolutely devastating battle that kicked this whole unbelievable story off. So, the year is 1356. We are deep into the Hundred Years' War. England's King Edward III is trying to expand his French territories, and his son, the famous Edward the Black Prince, is the one leading the charge. So picture this. You've got the English army, led by the Black Prince. There are only about 7,000 of them, and they're deep in enemy territory, they're tired, they're running out of supplies, and they're about to run into a French army that is way, way bigger.
And that's the French side, 35,000 men. That's 5 times the size of the English force. On paper, this should have been a total blowout, an easy, decisive win for France. But the English had an ace up their sleeve, a game-changing piece of technology. And this really tells the story. The English longbow, it could fire something like 15 arrows a minute, compared to maybe 3 to 5 bolts from a French crossbow. It was faster, it had a longer range, and its arrows could punch right through armor. It was basically the machine gun of the medieval battlefield. The English also used this absolutely brutal strategy called a chevauchée. They weren't just trying to conquer land. They were burning towns, torching crops, and just terrorizing the French countryside. This was economic warfare, designed to destroy the French king's ability to fight and force him into a big battle, which is exactly what happened here.
So look, it wasn't just the bows. The Black Prince was a brilliant tactician. He picked his ground perfectly, a small hill protected by marshes and thick hedges. This forced the French knights to get off their horses and attack uphill on foot straight into a storm of arrows. A perfectly timed cavalry charge at the end sealed the deal. It was a tactical masterpiece. For France, the outcome was just unthinkable. Their army was shattered, thousands were dead, and their king was now a prisoner of the English. And this one event sent the entire kingdom into a complete tailspin. With the king gone, France was basically rudderless, and in that power vacuum, the country didn't just crack, it completely exploded. I mean, just look at how fast everything fell apart. Within just 2 years of the king's capture, the government in Paris is being openly challenged, high-ranking nobles are getting murdered in the streets, and the entire countryside just erupts in a massive, violent rebellion. Right in the capital, a merchant named Etienne Marcel was leading this reform movement that basically declared war on the nobles. His followers literally stormed the royal palace and murdered 2 of the prince's top marshals right there in front of him. The whole political order was just collapsing from the inside. And if you thought things were bad in the city, well, out in the countryside, it was even worse. A revolt known as the Jacquerie broke out. You had peasants who were just fed up with the endless war, the crushing taxes, and a nobility they felt had failed them. So they rose up and started slaughtering lords and burning down castles. So just try to put yourself in his shoes for a second. Your kingdom is bankrupt. Your capital city is in open rebellion. The countryside is literally on fire. It's a failed state. And this is the mess King John is supposed to go back and fix. Which, of course, brings us back to our big question. Why on earth would he choose to go back to prison? Well, historians have basically landed on 2 competing theories. One is very noble, and the other is, a lot more cynical. So on one hand, you have the chivalrous view. It's all about honor. A king's word is his bond. End of story. But then you have the pragmatic view, which suggests a totally different motive. Maybe, just maybe, prison was a better option than trying to rule a kingdom that had completely fallen apart. And there's some pretty compelling evidence for that pragmatic side. His captivity, it wasn't a dungeon with rots and chains. The English treated him like a visiting royal. He was living a life of luxury, buying horses and pets,
and he even had his own court band and an astrologer on staff. It was less of a prison and more of a gilded cage. But you can't just write off the whole honor thing. For the medieval nobility, your word was literally everything. Your reputation was a kind of currency, maybe even more valuable than gold. For a king to break his parole, I mean, that would have been a stain on his character he could never ever wash away. He had to set an example. Then again, let's just get real for a second. Look at his options. Option A, go back to France, a country with no money, assassins running around the capital, and peasant armies burning everything down and try to fix it. Option B, stay in your comfy English castle with your pets and your court band. So the cynical take is that his honorable decision also happened to be the much, much easier one. But, regardless of why he did it, the crisis he left behind had devastating, long-lasting consequences for his country. That peasant revolt, the Jacquerie, it was put down with sickening brutality. The nobility wanted revenge, so they launched what's known as the counter-Jacquerie, massacring the rebels in a wave of violence that was every bit as horrific as the uprising itself. And the political price tag for that defeat at Poitiers, it was huge. In 1360, France was just too weak to keep fighting. A treaty was signed that handed over nearly a quarter of the entire country to English control. It was an absolute national humiliation. So in the end, we're left with these two competing ideas of who this king was. Was he the ultimate man of honor, who believed a sacred vow was more important than the chaos swallowing his kingdom? Or was he a pragmatist, choosing a comfortable prison over the impossible job of ruling a failed state? It really leaves you with a final thought to chew on. In a world of such brutal reality, what was a king's honor truly worth? Was it a noble example or just a convenient escape?